You are now entering the hot take zone. This is Hot Takes with Terry and Nate.
Hey everybody, welcome back to 2D10. Today I sat down with Terry Robinson from Mage the podcast to watch the new teaser trailer for the Vampire the Masquerade Battle Royale game scheduled to come out next year. These are our first impressions, our hot takes, whatever we think about what we just watched. So without further ado, let's get right into it. You saw it, I saw it, and that's all we needed.
Yep.
I can
The
do
Conjuring 3.
We've both seen it. I would like to hear your opinions about what you've seen.
So this is said as someone who is interested in seeing the world of darkness thrive. I don't have particularly strong feelings about vampires. Some of my best friends are vampire fans, as I'll say. And I am interested in there being the healthiest and most robust WoD out there, because as a player, I want there to be more books and I want there to be more people that I can play my World of Darkness tabletop games with. So that is my view.
Yeah.
My immediate thought is the usage of the term battle royale makes me cringe. Quite simply because, like, I played PUBG, I dabbled in Fortnite, and like 100 vampires dropped into a city and being like, go fight it out. That's one of those things that makes me go, But if it's something where it's a 10 to 20 player game and you have 5 Camarilla members, 5 Anarchs, 5 Sabbat members fighting over a vital piece of city infrastructure or trying to prevent some other supernatural from doing something, I think that could be super cool. I see a lot of arguments that's like, that's not the tone of Vampire, it's not horror. And I'm like, sure. But like, vampire history is riddled with things like the war for New York or the war for San Francisco or the war between lichens and vampires in Chicago or the complexity of Montreal or the tinderbox that has historically been Mexico City. I understand that this is being set in Prague. So to me, there's nothing preventing that from being the linchpin of what will be the next stage in maybe the meta plot or the direction of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. And I'm excited for that. Anytime you have a company that is developing assets, that gives us more things that we can bring to the table in certain ways. And that is kind of my initial response. To me, it is a wager that the world of darkness is big enough that not everything tonally needs to point in the exact same direction. Like, for instance, in the first Star Wars movie, we had the tone of a scrappy rebellion Western where victory was snatched from the jaws of defeat at the last moment through heroic operation.
Yeah.
To say that was the theme and mood of The Empire Strikes Back, like for someone to go, that wasn't totally consistent, I think would be missing the point. I think a good franchise with a lot of interesting space can fit a lot of themes in it.
Sure.
There is the possibility for that destruction, but I guess that is kind of the totality of my initial thought. So I will say tentative excitement.
And, just to emphasize this for people who are happening upon this not aware, like, this is a 30-second piece of footage that probably has no bearing on the actual gameplay. We don't even know what the game is called.
It's ultimately going to be a dating sim.
Right, yeah. But we don't even know what the game is going to be called yet. But we do know it's a battle royale game. Now, your reasoning is incredibly sound. It is very hard to argue with what you just said. But I got to admit, that is not the impression that I got from it. What you've said is reasonable. It makes a lot of sense. And quite frankly, it's probably where the developers are coming from creating that game. Like, it's just another game on the market that's going to help us to increase brand awareness. However, here is my big problem with it. One, just watching the video, nothing about that video that I saw said anything Vampire the Masquerade to me. To me, the fact that there was simply blood in it is what kind of made it a vampire game. And I've played some battle royale games. I know what battle royale games are. And when I see a bunch of creatures climbing up walls and leaping across rooftops, firing guns at each other, that is exactly the opposite of what Vampire the Masquerade is to me. Those battles and those things that you talk about, they definitely exist. However, they exist within the confines of the world that's been created, the world of darkness. And a bunch of vampires jumping roof to roof is pretty blatantly a masquerade breach problem. And the world that we've been fed through V5 is that it's extra important for them not to be out swinging their weird, crazy bone scythes and firing machine guns at each other on the roof of some ancient building in Prague. So that's where the disconnect occurs to me. Also, the other major issue that I have is the fact that it is a battle royale game, because battle royale games are the most trendy thing in gaming right now. Everybody's trying to put out their own PUBG, their own battle royale game where you have 20 or 30 people fighting. And unless you're adding something new and really truly interesting to separate yourselves from the pack, I just don't see how that's going to really do anything for the World of Darkness line in the long term. People are just going to see it and go, "Oh, what's this novelty vampire thing? Okay, that's cool. That's it." I think most people, especially people that are primarily focused in the video game world, their understanding of Vampire the Masquerade comes from Bloodlines. It did build an audience over time because people got into the lore and the story and the meta plot of the game. The storytelling was what was really the draw. It wasn't the running around and beating people up. And to me, when you present a game that's kind of designed to be deep role play, it's designed to draw you into the meta plot of the world. It's designed to draw you into the storytelling, and you just basically slap the vampire logo on a run around brawl game. Like, to me, I don't see how that's going to do anything in the long term to grow the game line, to grow World of Darkness, to grow Vampire. I think it's going to do the opposite. I think too much is just going to water down that brand.
To me, one of the questions is ultimately going to be, what does the game look like? And I can think of a bunch of battle royale variants that still maintain those themes. So say, for instance, it's a 25 player game or something like that. You get 4 or 5 vampires and 20 members of the Second Inquisition. I think thematically that could work perfecally fine.
Sure.
Or something like that. An asymmetrical battle royale game.
Sure.
So if it is everyone versus everyone, then I don't see how that works.
So let me pose a for instance to you.
Shoot.
Okay, Vampire is not your primary cup of tea, but you dwell in the world of darkness. Everybody acknowledges you as the mage guy. Take this for instance. This doesn't exist, but for instance, a game like Gauntlet, right? And your character was the mage, and you ran around and shot spells at ghosts and at goblins and at monsters. But they put mage to it, right? They said, "Oh, you're a mage, and you can pick, whatever you want to play." But like, the whole core of the game is you run around and you shoot spells at things. Would that be something that you'd be like, "Oh, I'm 100% about that"?
I wouldn't be necessarily 100%, but say, for instance, in that game, it did a really good job of saying you are a practitioner of a paradigm that is very steeped in faith of some sort.
Right.
Maybe you're something like a Templar, or maybe something like a member of the Celestial Chorus's more militant branch, or something like that. If they really nailed the trappings of it, I would be fine with it. if I got to be a Euthanatos knight assassin who was able to slowly manipulate fate, and that is the way that I killed people, by like
Right.
drawing hexes upon them, and it really sealed the world for me. I am so starved for mage stuff. Like I would run around like doing a victory lap.
Yeah,
Like
fair enough. Right, fair enough.
it could be a reskinning of Bejeweled, where you're like, make your quintessence match, and I would be like, yeah, mage.
Yeah, you know, as I was asking you that question, I was like, how many mage games are there that aren't
we got a cell
tabletop?
phone game.
Right, like what, you know, so yeah, at that point, maybe you just be like, well, it's got mage on it, so that's cool.
Yeah. So, but back to your key question. I think the question is, one, the two contradictory questions that I think are completely legitimate, we don't have any information on, is what does brand dilution for a tabletop RPG look like? There are plenty of cases where the movie is different from the book, or the video game is different from the tabletop, and
Right.
we don't seem to have a problem with that.
Right.
Like we seem to be okay with that. And then the question is it possible to release under what circumstances does releasing a game hurt the brand? And to me, there are a couple of those cases. One is if there is a core creative team that if there's one person that has to give everything the thumbs up or thumbs down, and they're spending all this time with a video game that ultimately flops when they could be getting our player's guide out the door,
Right.
or working on introducing the Sabbat, then yes, the tabletop loses. Or alternatively, if it introduces people to say, hey, this world looks really cool. Like, if nothing else, if we get a whole bunch of stunning visuals on what Oblivion looks like, or what Ospecs looks like, or things like that, I think that's super helpful within any gaming thing. Just more visuals of what the world looks like. If nothing else, it will give me a Pinterest board to work from, and I think that's super
Right.
cool.
Right.
Now, if it's one of those things where it's like, oh, this game is popular and people want this, and now we have to shift the tabletop game to give that, then
Right.
yes, that goes in the, oh, this is a problem. Like so we have the paradoxical case where if the war for Prague, let's just call it that, becomes this big out in the open war that drives the meta plot for 5th edition, and it is now the horror is not you fighting your beast, but you fighting for survival. That is a huge fundamental shift to the game, and if all the future supplements deal towards that, then yeah, I think that can certainly be a blow to the tabletop game.
It kind of concerned me too, just like the imagery that I saw in it, and I'll try to go into a little bit deeper detail on this. Like, you know, I talked about like them climbing up the walls and leaping tall buildings in a single bound. Like, those were things that I truly felt like didn't really fit the feel of it. But okay, whatever. Vampires are strong; they can climb and they can jump. That's fine. But then at the end, you know, seeing the hunter, you know, the mortal hunter with the shield becoming visible, and they were invisible, and I was just like, well, I mean, haven't they ever heard of Ospecs? I'm not buying it. Like, it doesn't work for me. That just doesn't fit into, you know, the previous 30 years of what's been presented to me. And now the big concern is, oh, the human beings are killing out all the vampires. Like, to me, that doesn't really bode well for the long-term success of your story if all of your vampires are dying.
My two thoughts on that are, there will be a point at which the mortals think they win, and there is precedent for this within World of Darkness continuity. After the Week of Nightmares, everyone take a drink. There was a feeling that the death of the Ravnos Antediluvian marked the last gasp of vampires, when in actuality it was the opposite. Shit was about to get so real you didn't even know. So I think there is that case where at some point the mortals kind of say, hey, we're done. They realize this infestation goes on forever, so they're like, okay, as long as it stays below a certain level, cool beans. My other thought is, if this is an entryway, so if we now have hunters that have supernatural powers, like say this person in question is a Hunter the Reckoning hunter or something like that, or a mage or a sorcerer or something like that. Suddenly the Inquisition learns about a whole bunch of other stuff, and you're no longer worried about just vampires. You're no longer looking just for blank bodies, but now you have to deal with man beasts, ghosts, mummies, mages, and everything else. Suddenly that battlefield gets a lot bigger, and the heat kind of gets pulled off of vampire, which also fundamentally changes the world of darkness, because one of the enduring themes of WoD is everyone kind of sticks to their knitting with a few exceptions.
Yeah.
So I think that is a way it could be taken. Now, if I can ask a question to you, if you were to be and Paradox said, Nate, we want your help coming up with a 20-person or 30-person combat style Old World of Darkness informed game. Do you think it could be done? And if so, what would it look like?
Oh yeah, I think it could be done, but I don't think it should be done with Vampire the Masquerade. I think it could be done with Vampire the Masquerade. I truly do. And I think if all of the right pieces were in play, if the Sabbat and the Camarilla were both in play, and they put it in a place that wasn't massively populated like Prague, or instead they put it in a place like, I don't know, Detroit. Right. Just like throwing that out there, or Gary, where the population is diminished, but the presence of vampires isn't necessarily, where the prying eyes of mortals wouldn't be available. If you read all of the earlier editions between vampire sects, the wars that they fight are not fought out in the open in the streets. They're not fought in, the downtown city center, because it doesn't serve either faction of them to do that. For all the talk that the Sabbat has about breaking the Masquerade, about not giving any concern to the traditions, if they're trying to take over Camarilla territory, they still have to exist there afterwards. So they have to make proper accommodations to ensure that their wars are not observed by outside influences. I feel like with the fall of the Tremere Chantry in Vienna, I feel like with the fall of London, as it's been presented to us in the Fall of London book, I feel like with all of the things that have happened throughout Europe, vampires fighting out in the open in Prague just doesn't seem to make sense in the world that they've presented. And I think that that's my big issue. I would do it with the werewolves, and I would have them fight the worm, because you can literally take the werewolves and the worm and put them anywhere and do it in a way that is not going to be ridiculous, in my opinion, because werewolves turn into giant, foaming at the mouth war beasts that cause human beings to run in fear from them. And the worm is the fucking worm. So, and it doesn't even have to be on Earth. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can
five-nippled murder machines.
Right. You can put the werewolves and you can put the worm anywhere.
I think there is a way that we could get some meta plot lead up that makes sense of this. I am kind of crossing my fingers that one or two of the scenes we got doesn't make it to the final game. The vampire on vampire part, I think, needs a lot of explanation, unless ta-da, this is the introduction of the Sabbath.
Right.
And something crazy is happening. Yeah. Or the ministry does something crazy, or you're trying to prevent the Hakacha from doing some blood right. Like, so I'm trying to think of the few cases where there would be open vampiric warfare.
Right.
I think a vampire versus mortals game, maybe with like traitor mechanics, could be super neat, where you get 5 Sabbat, 5 Camarilla, and 30 mortals.
Yeah.
And everyone's goal is to kind of be the last person standing. But secretly 2 players are ghouls or something like that, or one person is a antitribu or something like that. If this is the game as presented, I am worried, because I think the secret worry I do have is the fact that Paradox has indicated that the computer games will drive the narrative. Like, they get pride of place in determining what is canon, and that is the part I think that worries me.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I would be able to say, "Hey, the books say this thing, the video game says this thing, and yeah, that's a slightly more John Woo World of Darkness." But if it is both the case that the computer games get to lead and the World of Darkness will be unified, I think my concern etches up 2 notches. I think there is still a window where we get something nice that kind of makes sense, but that's not a huge window. And I'm hoping they hit that window. I guess I'm being the optimist there.
And the truth of the matter is, we truly don't know. Like,
we just don't know.
Are only going off of what they've presented. And when I saw like the machine guns, and I'm like, why are vampires shooting at each other with machine guns? Like, are they trying to annoy each other? Like, what is going on here? And, and I see this character that they present with these weird like bone scythes on her back and like a rose tattoo, and I'm like, who is this? What is this? Is this a Tordor anti-tribute, or is this like a Zamis, or what am I seeing here? Who in the fan club, who in the vampire community was like, what's really lacking? A game where we run around and kill each other. Like, that's what this world is lacking. And so to me, I see it as a game that's not intended to appeal to the current fans. It's meant to appeal to fans of battle royale games.
My only hesitancy in agreeing with you on that is you have been on the internet for long enough that you recognize the gap between what you consider true vampire to be, what you consider vampire's essence as a game to be, and what is actually played. And there is a gap there. Some people want to run around and be Cane Bros.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think one of the secret concerns may be the fact that maybe this is what the fans want. And maybe there are just a lot of Cane Bros out there, and the rest of us who think we have a bead on what the game really is are hugely outnumbered. And that to me would be the concern if we were to suddenly make that Mage game where it was running around blowing up technocracy constructs, turning walls into gelatin and saying, paradigm be damned. I have the ability to change reality. Because I've been enough of those conversations where people are like, so this happened in my Mage game. And my immediate response is, how? How did you get there? And I think you've probably heard the conversations where people were like, so I'm a 4th gen abomination Mokole, and I'm wondering if Bardo, and you're like, what? So I'm partially worried that this is us learning something about ourselves, that the preponderance of vampires players are really beer and pretzels vampire players. And there's the secret contingent of people out there that do not have podcasts that are like, oh man, they looked into my heart, and now we're making the video game based on the tabletop I always wanted. And like that's sometimes the truly terrifying part to me. Like, what did you know about me that I didn't know about me?
If you guys have opinions about this video and you'd like to share them with me, with Terry, there's comments. It's YouTube. Leave us comments and we'll debate you ad nauseum. So,
yep, hot takes with Terry and Nate.
All right, thanks for watching.